Through the prayers of Holy Father, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Today, 25th of June, according to the civil calendar, is June 12th of the church calendar. We commemorate today our Holy Father, Onesphorus the Great. This holy ascetic had been living a whole 60 years in the desert when the monk Paphnutius visited him. His head and beard reached down to the ground, and long hair as white as snow had grown all over his body during his years of nakedness. His appearance was ascetical, unearthly, and awe-inspiring. Seeing Paphnutius, he called him by name and then recounted to him his life in the desert. His guardian angel had appeared to him and taken him to that place. When he had survived an intense struggle with diabolical temptation, and when his heart had become utterly established in love for God, an angel had brought him bread to eat. And beside that, through God's gracious providence, a palm tree grew up at one side of his head that gave good dates, and a spring of water began to flow there. But especially, said Onesphorus, my food and drink are the sweet words of God. To Paphnutius, question about his receiving of communion. The hermit answered, the angel of God brought him communion every Sunday. On the next day, the old man told Paphnutius that it was the day of his departure from this world. Then he knelt down, prayed to God, and gave his spirit into God's hand. Then Paphnutius saw a heavenly light that illumined the body of the departed saint, and had inquired of the angelic host. He buried Onesphorus' body with honor and returned to his own monastery, there as a living witness to narrate to the brethren for their edification the wonderful life of the man of God and the greatness of God's providence towards those who give themselves wholly to his service. Onesphorus died in the year 400. Our father, Peter the Antonine. He was a Greek by birth and a soldier by profession. Being once engaged in the battle against the Arabs, he was captured, chained, and thrown into prison. Peter spent a long time in imprisonment in the town of Samara on the Euphrates and prayed God with all his being to free him and take him to some desert place where he could devote himself to prayerful asceticism. St. Simeon the God receiver appeared to him in the prison together with St. Nicholas and touched the iron of his chains, which melted likewise. Peter suddenly found himself in the open outside the city. He immediately set out on the road for Rome, where he was tonsured as a monk by the Pope at the tomb of St. Peter. He then set out by ship to return to east. The most holy Mother of God appeared to him in a dream, talking with St. Nicholas, and she told St. Nicholas that she had set a month Athos apart for Peter to live on the asceticism. Peter had at one time not heard of Mount Athos. Disembarking then at the holy mountain, Peter settled in a cave where he spent 53 years in a strict asceticism, in struggle with hunger and thirst, with heat and cold, and especially with diabolical powers, until he had overcome them all by the help of God. When he had undergone the first temptation and succeeded in the first test before God, an angel of God began to bring him bread every 40 days. The tempter appeared to him several times in the guise of an angel of light, but Peter drove him away with the sign of the cross and the name of the most holy Mother of God. A year before his death, a deer hunter passed that way and learned of the saint's life from his lips. He died in 734, and his relics were taken to Macedonia. Our Holy Father Timothy, an Egyptian hermit, he lived a ascetic life first in the Tibet, then went off into the desert where he spent 30 years being pleasing to God. He died peacefully. Our Holy Fathers, Bastian and Jonah, monks of the monastery of Solovech, they were drawn and cast onto the shore in 1651. A sign appeared over their graves, and a church was built there. Later, the monastery of Petrominsk was founded on the site. Once Sir Peter, sheltering from a storm at sea, spent 3 days there and made a cross which he erected on the shore. For consideration, communion is a great and wonderful mystery. Even solitaries and hermits sought opportunities to receive Holy Communion. St. Mary of Egypt begs St. Zosimus to bring the holy mysteries to the Jordan and give her communion. Our Holy Father, Paphnutius, returned from his visit to St. Omniferus, found 4 young men living the ascetic life in a very humble community. When Paphnutius asked them if they had any chance of receiving communion, they replied that an angel of God came to them every Sunday and brought them communion. Paphnutius remained until the following Sunday and personally witnessed this. When the Sunday dawned, the whole monastery was filled with an indescribable heavenly fragrance. While they were at prayer, an angel of God, in the form of a handsome young man, bright as lightning, while they were appeared with a holy gift. Paphnutius was terrified and fell to the ground in fear, but they raised him up, and he also received communion at the angel's hands. Saint Onesiphorus received communion at the hands of an angel according to his own testimony, as did many other solitaries and hermits. It is therefore a completely mistaken idea to think that solitary and hermit did not receive communion. God, who completely provided for their bodily sustenance, did not leave them without the life-giving food of the body and blood of Christ the Lord. Thank you for listening. I pray that the good Lord will bless you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and one true God. Amen.